The floor is yours.
Okay, many thanks for the introduction, and it's indeed a pleasure to be in front of such an appreciative audience. And I'm Ahti Salo, and here's my homepage. So my research interests are mainly in the fields of decision analysis, risk management, forecasting, foresight, and I've been internationally at various universities, and also I'm the editor-in-chief of the Euro Journal on Decision Processes until the middle of July. And I'll be quoting some publications of mine in the presentation, so if you're interested in those, so just go to my homepage and you'll be able to locate the exact details for those. And the one perspective which I thought to highlight in my presentation, against what kind of a background am I making some observations as to what is foresight, what is horizon scanning, and how they might relate to behavioral operational research. And in my career, I've had a few rare opportunities to work on pretty heavy-duty policy studies. So in the late 90s, I was in charge of the first parliamentary technology assessment study for this Finnish parliament for the Futures Committee. So we handed with the late member of the parliament, Martti Tiuri, a report of some 200 pages to the Speaker of the Parliament, which was then debated in the Parliament for 2 hours. So that was interesting. And then we wrote a paper on that one. And I've been evaluating large-scale research and technology programs. This was an investment of some 200 million euros at the peak of the IT boom at the turn of the millennium, when Nokia was the most valuable company in Europe in terms of market capitalization. I was in charge as the project manager of the National Foresight Study, Finsight, for the Finnish government, commissioned essentially by the Academy of Finland and the Finnish Funding Agency for Technology and Innovation. And presently I'm a member of the advisory group on foresight, appointed by the Finnish Prime Minister's office, and there's an expert group on strategic foresight for research and innovation, appointed by the EU Directorate General for Research and Innovation. So I've been working quite a bit, let's say, in contexts where foresight, by the name of it, has something to say, and being an OR person, operational researcher, then the question is that how does this relate to OR? And I would take it, in a sense, for axiomatically, I could say preliminary, we care about the future. Some futures, possible futures, are better than others. The future is contingent, depends on present day and near-term decisions. And of course, as you have heard during this summer school, many other factors as well. It's not only our decisions, but how the many uncertainties that we have in the world come to play out. The role of operations research is to support that decision making, so that ideally we are in a position to have some of these better, if not the best, future come out. And seen from this perspective, operations research should help us understand what may happen and how the future is shaped by the decisions. Okay, so this is the set against which I'm talking about this topic. But before jumping into conclusions, I also thought of actually making, let's say, observations which are less scientific. And one of the observations which we can clearly make in seeking to understand about the future is that we need to understand the future in relation to the past. And here's a quote from Steve Jobs, who made a statement that you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. This approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life. So this is a very, very perspicacious statement. And before I start to delve into the, let's say, behavioral biases in operations research method, I thought of actually pointing out some topics from a paper from the Ladies' Home Journal, which is an unusual article perhaps for you, but this is from the year 1900. So it's 116 years of age. We didn't have any operations research at the time, but the future has been there always, and our attempts to understand the future have been around us as well. And at this time they didn't have like systematic foresight methodologies such as the Delphi study, but nevertheless, and I have some copies of this so you can circulate these around in the audience, you can read it, but I've taken but a few quotations, but nevertheless you have clearly an emphasis on expert judgment. So this author, John Alfred Watkins, has gone to the wisest and most careful men of the greatest institutions of science and learning, asking each to forecast what will have been wrought a century from now, and resulting in prophecies which will seem strange, almost impossible. And now let's see what kinds of prophecies there have been. And yet they're not awfully surprising. One of them is this one. This is verbatim. So wireless telephone and telegraph circuits will span the world. Okay, clearly true, I would say. Perhaps not Nokia as it was like a few years ago, but nevertheless we have made the transition from these kinds of phones to the mobile ones. Similarly, photographs will be telegraphed from any distance, and the photographs which then didn't have any colors have been transformed into something which is more pleasing to the eye. Airships will not successfully compete with surface, land and water vessels for passenger or freight traffic. So there's a question mark to some extent. We have both at the moment, and certainly enough, aviation is truly a big part of the traffic, international traffic nowadays. And then some other ones which have not really gone the way they were expecting. So mosquitoes, houseflies and roaches will have been exterminated, okay? And there have been some attempts. We did have the DDT in the 50s, early 60s. So I don't know whether or not it would be possible in principle if we wanted to kill all these insects. But nevertheless, I would put a question mark. We would rather appreciate the diversity, the biodiversity of the environment. And there are also other statements, such as to, if you read the paper, and you're welcome to keep them, but nevertheless, how we would go about maintaining our health, for instance. However, taking stock of some of the claims in this article, we do have some biases in hindsight. I mean, and I think that we need to learn from the past. But I would say that overall, when I got this paper from a colleague of mine who was working for the European Commission at the time, I would say that there are many predictions which were actually strikingly accurate. And one implication of that is that it pays off to think about the future. So there's some utility, and actually I think that it's the responsible attitude to have. However, there are some biases, and one of them is this of, let's say, enormous optimism. So most statements in this paper, even when it comes to killing the insects, they are stated as optimistic visions about something which we seek to achieve. They're the intended consequences of future generations of and their efforts in creating new technologies or innovations. So this means that the emphasis is on intended consequences rather than on the unintended ones. And when it came to the DDT, for instance, in the 50s and 60s, it was seen as a way of improving the productivity of agriculture, but not so much on causing harm to the environment. And actually, if you go to some policy studies which have been carried out on the Worst, failures in risk management. So this was a study carried out by the European Environmental Protection Agency in Copenhagen. So they would be looking at these kinds of, and the one mistake is that they failed to look at the unintended ones. So when we think about the future, we think about the objectives which we seek to achieve. We should decidedly and purposely also seek to look at what kinds of things might come about as a result of this innovation, consequences which we're not actually seeking to generate. So optimism seen from this, there's a bias. And secondly, blind spots. So the enormously important technological discontinuities were missed, like nuclear energy. And clearly enough, in 1900 they didn't have any understanding of the internal structure of the atoms or the like, so it was clearly. But similarly for ICT and genetic structure. So that was in, I think it was early 50s when the DNA was covered. So these discontinuities were missed. And also a third bias, arguably, is that of short-termism in predicting the long run. And here I'd say that the economic viability of changing technology, so they were evaluating the current performance of the aircraft they then had, as opposed to thinking of how might this particular technology improve in the decades to come, and contrasting that kind of a development with what might be happening to ships, which have been around for thousands of years. So short-termism is one aspect. And a fourth dimension is that of realizing that values too change. So I would argue that some of the claims and aspirations which are in that particular paper put forward as something being desirable, they would now actually offend our values, such as the killing of all insects. So these are some of the things which I think that we can derive from this particular study. I mean, if you call it a study, but it was a serious attempt to see what will happen in 100 years. And oftentimes when we think about technology, so the emphasis may be more on this, what might be coming about as a result of what is technologically feasible, but only those aspects tend to materialize in society which are also economically viable. And furthermore, not everything which is economically viable may be acceptable in society. These are proper subsets. So I think that this is an inclusion sign here. So I think that having this kind of a reflection to create some sort of a checklist of criteria, what kinds of innovations are actually possible, in the sense they would cover all these aspects. Okay, then let's say more formally. So what do we mean by foresight? And coming from an essentially technical university, so I took some widely accepted definitions for foresight, and Martin and Irvine, they provided a definition in the mid-80s. So we are talking about the process of seeking to organize a systematic process which attempts to look into the longer term future of science and technology and economy and society, with the aim of guiding research investments, with the aim of creating benefits to society. And then some 14 years ago I was a member of this expert group for the European Commission, where we had a definition of this kind. And then I co-edited with Kerstin Kulsa a special issue for the journal Forecasting on technology foresight, and we had a relatively lengthy definition, which I would actually now in hindsight make shorter. But nevertheless, so these are, let's say, rigorous academic definitions for what we mean by foresight. And then we may also pose the question, how does it relate to technology assessment, which is another term, and also to evaluation. And also I would here position evaluation as something which would be looking at what's happening in research. So many of the universities are being subjected to research evaluation, so we are looking at what's happening in the supply of research results, writing papers, and how is it being conducted. Okay, so it would be looking at that aspect, possibly looking at is it aligned with some of the priorities, strategic priorities, and how does it link to what is needed in society, but the emphasis is here. And technology assessment, especially in Germany or German-speaking countries, may be looking at what might be possible, so to speak. So we do have some really, really crazy ideas, and the question is that what might they mean? And if it were to be the case that we would be in a position to create them, is there any demand for those? And Foresight, in a sense, would be here in between, seeking to link the two with the aim of providing some strategic guidance to decision making. And over the decades, there have been some shifts in as to how Foresight has evolved. So, and if we think of the 50s and 60s, 50s was the Cold War, in the 60s, further to the promise by President Kennedy, humanity succeeded in sending man to the moon in 1969. And at that time, it was really, really challenging in the sense that the technology was, I think it's still an enormous achievement that we were able to send man to the moon at the time, given what kinds of computers they had. But nevertheless, it was evidently necessary to forecast how the technologies would be evolving. And now over the decades, there have been shifts. And this is from a paper by Karakost and Muller with the European Commission. So they've been like identifying to some of the key technologies, and in industrial now it is here increasingly. And I would say that this surely enough extends far beyond. But now if we think of how technologies are shaping the world, so there's a continuous interflux, merging of technologies, let's say like biotechnology and computer science are interwoven in many ways and create very sudden. So arguably, many of the technologies are penetrating society much more quickly than previously. And that is especially the case for, let's say, the transformative applications we've seen in the realm of social media, Facebook and platform companies like Uber and Airbnb. So there's been, within a scope of a few years only, they've transformed. And these are some of the benefits from a purposeful deliberation of what Foresight might offer. So it has benefits in terms of framing the process, scanning, forecasting, visioning, planning, acting. And I've been looking at some of the previous slides, and I think that in the presentations on problem structuring, you've had these activities, and I won't go into the details as to what kinds of specific Foresight methodologies there are. I don't have the time to go scenarios, Delphi technologies, time series analysis. That would be an entire course. But nevertheless, these are some of the benefits which have been attributed to Foresight as a result of, especially from the company perspective. And then I thought, when it comes to horizon scanning, actually I thought of reporting to you one actual project we carried out for the European Commission some years ago with Totti, former doctoral student of mine, and Cristiano and Vicente are from the European, or were working at the European Research Center at the time, and Eva is currently at the Aalto School of Business as assistant professor. And this was a study which we carried out for the Bureau of European Policy Advisors, which at the time was acting as a think tank for the European Commission. And the one rationale for this project was to provide a better understanding of the state of the world in 2025 and the policy implications for the European Union, provide some inputs to the policy agenda, and it was commissioned within the European Commission by the Directorate Science, Economy and Society, and it was a, let's say, very intensive project where horizon scanning was in the fore. And as I mentioned in my analysis of the article in the Ladies' Home Analysis Journal, one of the arguments was that what are the blind spots? So are there any blind spots? So that was one of the questions. And horizon scanning is a methodology which hopefully helps us scan the horizon so that we are it's like a radar, so that we can better identify all those issues that might be of some relevance. So we provided this short definition: creative process of collective sense-making by way of collecting and synthesizing observations that hold potential for the formulation of pertinent future developments and derivation of actionable implications for decision-making. So this was the definition. And some key questions then: how to recognize such signals, how to explore what might those signals imply, how to evaluate them, possibly even synthesize those into meaningful clusters which might have some implications for decision making. And I would be, in what I cover here, I'd be focusing on the first 4 bullet points. And how was this then carried out? So there were systematic phases. One of them was that of taking stock of the literature, analyzing recent foresight and forward-looking studies. And there was the Future-Oriented Technology Analysis Conference, which had been recently organized. So they looking at trends, and trends are like things which we already recognize as being a trend. So it has been around for long enough so that we say that, let's say, climate change, we know that it's going on, or the aging of the population. Emerging trends, so that's a new thing, and like the platform economy, so to speak, is one of them. It is a trend indeed, but it's an emerging one. And unexpected and improbable rare events, which might be of high relevance to the year. Then we organized an online survey assessing the relevance, novelty, and probability of the, let's say, topics which came from this review, and then a workshop. And how was the literature review carried out? So the whole study had to have some structure, and that structure was provided by having 6 areas. So one on demography, second in economy, environment research, e-governance, defense and security. Data was collected from well over 20 reports per each one of these areas, identifying facts, projections, time frame, related drivers and weak signals, impact of the issue in each one of these 6 areas, and implications. And the issues which came from this analysis included close to 400 issues, and you can see these. And actually, in order to lend some depth to what these really were, I'll show you the list. And we don't have to go into the detail, but just to see what kinds of issues there are. So this is the one for demography. And we gave all of these issues a well-defined identifier, so you could easily go back and forth. So these are the identifiers. And I will explain the colors later on. But one of them was like nuclear weapons, pandemics, massive migrations due to climate change, and so on and so on. So these were the kinds of issues which were deemed relevant. And the
DI6, just for curiosity?
DI6, the first collapse of a third world large city.
Suffocating.
So I mean, Venezuela is in trouble, and I don't know if Caracas. Yes. So I mean, just looking at the news broadcast. So if you qualify, it's near being a failed state now, I think. So this would be. I mean, so that could be one. But I would say that these are the labels. So we would have a proper link to the supporting literature and an example. So it's not only this one, but nevertheless, this would allow you to go back and forth. Okay, so this is the kind of a material, and it goes on and on and on. But nevertheless, and these are the economy and so on. It's okay, but you have a feel for what kinds of issues then emerged.
Sorry, what was the percentages again?
Excuse me?
The percentages.
I will explain those in a. I will explain those in a. Oops. How do I go back? Okay, done. Okay, so we had like some nearly 400 issues, and now the question is that you can't have a report containing like 400 issues which are being collected in a haphazard way. So you have to make sense out of it. So what we introduced in this case was to evaluate these issues. And the three criteria, and I trust you've heard of multi-criteria methodology. So they were, is it relevant for EU policy making? So that was one criterion because it was commissioned by the Bureau of European Policy Advisors. So it may be of interest to Southern European countries, but not of broader EU relevance. Okay, so novelty meant that it should be new. So if it's been discussed for decades already, it shouldn't be contained in this. It may be relevant, yes, sort of, but it's not new, so it wouldn't lead to the result, which would be a fresh report. And probability, and this now has to do with the attempt to identify those blind spots. Okay, so those issues which are being perceived as being relevant by some, but not all, are in this kind of study more important than those things which are unanimously very, very, so we're looking at the blind spots now. So these were the criteria. And how was the online survey carried out? We had 270 participants, and these are from all EU countries, the number of experts, okay. And we used the robust portfolio modeling approach in three different kinds of analysis. There was the mean-oriented analysis. So we didn't provide exact weights to the criteria, but nevertheless, in the mean-oriented analysis, most weight was given to relevance, then to novelty, then to probability. Okay, so this would really point out those which are most relevant, but not necessarily surprising. Rare event would be those which would be like unlikely to happen. And then the one thing which is also relevant in horizon scanning, on what topics is there the greatest dispersion, variance on judgments? And those are interesting because if there are some issues, some people think that it is highly novel, other people think that it's not so novel. So there are differences of opinion. And then we may wish to explore what are the reasons for those differences. And how was this technically done? And this is a very brief introduction into the, so we would have like several experts would be collecting, and this, I don't say that this is the best or the optimal way of doing it, but nevertheless combining, in this case, the some 8 judgments on novelty and relevance into a single point, taking the mean. And we would then have this map for the different kinds of issues with measures of dispersion as well. And how does the robust portfolio modeling work? And this is now a 5-minute summary. So we have the judgments, different kinds of issues. So we would be seeking to identify those which are better on several criteria. So assuming that we are looking at novelty and relevance, we could be forming a portfolio from issues number 1 and 2, which would be there. Okay. Similarly, 4 and 5 would give us a combination which is there, and we have like combinations of 2 issues. There are 10 of them, and is a portfolio of topics 3 and 4 really good? Not actually, because there's another one which is more interesting, assuming that we seek to have the most novel and most relevant ones. And as a result, we can identify the non-dominated portfolios, and then we revert back to the analysis of what kinds of issues they have in them. And as we can see, issue number 1 is in all of them, okay? And if we would not choose one, we would be somewhere in the dominated set. And similarly, issue number 4 is not in any one of these portfolios. And if we choose it, the resulting portfolio will be dominated. And continuing, we can then actually provide a categorization of all issues, meaning that issue number 1 is contained in all non-dominated portfolios. Number 4 is in no non-dominated portfolio, and then there's a borderline, which are contained in some but not all. So it provides some sort of a rough measure. What are the issues which are in the portfolios which are non-dominated? And we can also introduce some preference information. So if it were to be the case that novelty is more important than relevance, so we would be going either horizontally towards the right, but no longer vertically to upwards. So we are saying that novelty is more important. It leads to a situation where this particular portfolio is actually being dominated by 1 and 5. So we have a more restrictive separation of the issues. So this was now the approach we employed in establishing a categorization of the issues. And this is now what we had as a result of applying these 3 kinds of analysis to the analysis of issues, which now had been evaluated in view of relevance, novelty, and probability. So you could see that the mean-oriented analysis would have some issues which were like really, really relevant, followed by some, and others which were 0, and a rare event-oriented analysis, variance-oriented analysis. And actually, this is now actually what we had in the summary table. So the percentages which you saw were the percentages, was it a core, I mean a green issue in this kind of a diagram, and did it have a core index value? Was it contained in more than half the non-dominated portfolios? So this is the mean-oriented analysis with 2 colors, 100 or 50. A rare event oriented analysis, inverse probabilities would be given priority, and variance oriented analysis. And actually now we could revisit the document, and as you can see, so we can see that actually, fortunately, I think it's a rare event, so it is, but to the extent that it would certainly be harmful. Then another one, unexpectedly massive migrations due to climate change was considered one. And then other topics which come to the fore. But this is like worrisome. So more than half the populations that we do not the public health care may be eroding due to whatever. Health issues will increasingly shape the farming and food system in the world. That's a mean-oriented analysis in the core, and I think that we are increasingly concerned with all sorts. So it gives. So I would say that it's totally possible if you understand the analysis and you have a solid understanding of what, reasoned understanding of what these statements are. It gives meaningful results and helps eliminate. So instead of having like 400 topics, you'll have approximately 50 interesting topics for the report. So this was how it is worked. Up. Okay, so and one finally, I wonder how much time I have. I can. So how many minutes? 10 more minutes?
Let's
Okay.
say 8.
8 minutes, okay. So some thoughts on how this bears on behavior operations research. I would say that in the kinds of studies that, like the previous one or the earlier ones, it's rather difficult to impose rigorous research controls in real-world policy processes. So if you have real policy makers, so I mean having like different control groups is not easy to do, okay? But I would nevertheless say that there are ample opportunities for methodological work, which is interesting from the perspective of behavioral research. And I think that actually like the blind spots or horizon scanning, so you can sort of seek to derive what kinds of implications might it have for the shaping of the methodology, so broad consultation of stakeholder groups, okay? Because hopefully there is someone who's thinking differently, and if there's someone who's thinking differently, you have a higher chance of covering those, I mean, really like being less blind, so to speak. And it also means that when you do the analysis, you might wish to put specific emphasis on variability or low probability events. Then short-termism, looking at what has been the past. I mean, looking at, are there some exposed innovations? Some of the earlier innovations, how have they changed the world? And clearly enough, to the extent that we can build models, and we can also invite expert judgment, so we can compare the results of the two. And anchoring, so expanding, instead of just taking one statement as a basis for discussion, we can seek to expand the full range of possibilities. And actually I was facilitating a workshop in the Parliament a few weeks ago, looking at alternative structures about the university system. So really pushing the limits so that we would have alternatives which would be totally infeasible, but making sure that we are not anchored in the present, so to speak. So expanding the range of possibilities, allowing anonymity of participation, so that we are not taking it for granted that whoever says the first statement will be able to dominate the discussion, and also providing some opportunities for iterative learning in multiple rounds, as is the case in the Delphi methodology. So these are some of my reflections. And then you can choose one of these, or one or two or three points, and then you can seek to write an interesting article, but not too many things. So a good paper has one, at most two contributions, not like loads of different small important things. But nevertheless, so focusing on the one item which you seek to understand. And I think that I would say that political decision making, the decisions are not like isolated. They're all, in a sense, interwoven oftentimes. And I would say that it's instructive to get involved. I would encourage you to the extent that you are interested in how policymakers shape our society. So it would be a good exercise to get involved. And finally, I would like to say a few words about, if I have the 3 minutes? One, which might be. And So I've been working with Jeff and Alec Morton on portfolio decision analysis. And there's one issue which I would like to derive from our past work in project portfolio selection, which is like very easy to characterize. We have many, many loads of proposals. We can't choose everything. There are different measures of value, but it can be like the expected net present value. And the one key aspect is that we do not know for sure what will come out of these alternatives, so the decisions must be taken on uncertain value estimates. And as it happens, the realized performance often falls short of expectations, and this has been attributed to purposeful misrepresentation of information. Okay? As evidenced, for instance, when we have cost overruns in public procurement. So proposals for building a road or whatever bridge, and then we choose based on those uncertain estimates. And as it is the case, I mean, typically they tend to cost much more than, and this is now claimed to be the fault of those who are proposing. Why are they claiming to? And actually what you can do, it's not like necessarily due to lying, but if we look at what's happening in such a process is that even when the value estimates are unbiased, so on the average there's no lying, but it happens to be the case that those projects whose values have been overestimated tend to have a higher chance of getting selected. Okay? They have just good luck. And as a result of this one, on average, the realized value of the portfolio is less than what the estimates suggest. Okay? And the implication that you should be prepared to be disappointed for this phenomenon. And there's an example. So these are the actual values. Okay? Choosing 5 projects out of 12. The real value, see, these are the estimates, and they're not perfectly aligned. There are some projects, such as 4, it is thought to yield more value than what it actually gives. And project number 6, actually 3 yields much less value. The estimate is thought to yield much less value than what it actually does. Okay, so these are the differences. So in reality, if we knew what the real values are, we would be choosing based on the true project values, taking projects. As you can see, we would be taking the project number 8, which is here, 4, 12, and then these are very close to each other, 2 and 10, which is here. But that is something we cannot do. We are using the estimates, and instead of starting from the right, we are using the estimates, which means that we are starting from the top, taking the one project which has the highest estimated value, which is project number 4, 17, followed by 16.9, then 1, 15.5, and followed by 12 and 10. And there's a difference, so they differ. So we are thinking that we'll get 78.5, but actually what we are getting is 71.3, and the actual value of the portfolio is something in between. Okay, so it's easy to, and you can read. And the one implication which I think is worth recognizing is that this curse has been partly erroneously attributed to purposeful misrepresentation of information, as if it were a behavioral thing, but it lies in the nature of things. So I think that the word of caution which I'm hoping to say here is that not all alleged behavioral impacts are really like behavioral, or it's not behavior in the sense of people behaving badly. It's a behavior which is part of the process of optimization. So this is the takeaway which I hope to communicate to you from this analysis. So many thanks for your attention, and I don't know if we have any time for questions, but